You there?
Oh, hey, one sec. I'm just setting up some tech here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
All right, so let's jump right into it. Hi, Damon. Thanks for being on the show. My first question for
Thank
you is
you.
just what do you think is the most widespread misconception about leadership today?
I think it's that being a leader is there's essentially a recipe book for being a leader. In that there are ways to learn, there are books you can read, there are principles you can follow in being a leader, which is generally true. Um, but I think there's what you have construct proliferation throughout the leadership sphere. There's so many books and most of them are very good. There's so many theories on leadership. There's so many models of leadership that it's almost impossible to understand how to be a leader without actually doing it, because one of the biggest components of that is your own personality and what you are comfortable and adapted to, and what your sort of genetic makeup sort of leads you to be what kind of leader. So that's probably a misconception, is that it's easy to define, and it's just not.
Okay, I see. So leadership is difficult to define and it requires firsthand experience, and I guess it's different for everyone.
Yeah, it's definitely different for everyone. Everyone's got their own unique personality traits, and more sensitive to things like empathy. You've even got dark personality traits like narcissism and Machiavellianism that some people have. So you've got to adjust your leadership style not only for you, but for the team that you're leading, because your team will also have personality characteristics, and the industry you're in will have certain leader requirements that kind of dictate how you should lead. So there's definitely no one size fits all, and it's really hard to kind of wrap your hands around.
Okay, makes sense. So what is your personal preferred style of leadership in most situations?
Yeah, so I go off of a model that over, I don't know, probably 10 years, in the last 10 years of my career, is is worked for me, and it goes back to being sort of in an army academic environment. So sort of, well over halfway through my career, being forced to sit down and articulate, my leadership philosophy or my leadership vision. And so, you get an opportunity to sort of really, really think about it. What do you want to be as a leader? How do you want people to see you? What kind of teams do you want to develop in an academic setting? And then you get a chance to go out and practice it over and over, because we're only in jobs a year, maybe 2 years, and then you switch jobs, maybe go to another installation, and you get to try it again. So what I eventually kind of came to settle on was a simple P4 sort of matrix, and the first P is people. So you know teams are by definition complex systems. In order to sort of understand your complex system as much as you can, and then be able to make the outputs of that system as close to the right outputs as you can. You have to understand the agents within that system and how they interact. And, for people are almost impossible to predict 100% of the time, right? So the first piece, people, and I think, the big milestone when you concentrate on people, the first P is trust. So the first thing you want to build is trust. So what I do, in my model, is kind of go in and really try to understand the people and start establishing that trust relationship right off the bat. And by trust I mean, they have to know that I have either their best interest or the best interests of the unit, the organization, and some sort of balance between those two. They always know that I will make the decisions that's best for both, right? The next P is partnerships, is building teams. So once you've hit that threshold of trust in that team relationship, the next thing you want to do is kind of bind the group together. So trust is a one-on-one relationship. Now you got to bind the group together. So partnerships, focusing on that, you get the milestone of cohesion. And this is where you start to build out things like a unit identity or a team identity, where they all start to see the world the same way or see their place in the world the same way. And, maybe they have a motto for themselves or whatever, but this is where that starts to solidify. The next P is practice. I had to use all P's, but for practice, I mean, practicing the things that we're supposed to do well, and then actually doing the things that we're supposed to do well, right? And here, the output, the milestone, is confidence. And confidence, the precursor to confidence, of course, is competence. So we want to do the right way. We want to train correctly. We want to train as realistically as possible. This is a military setting, so that we're good at what we do, which will instill confidence that's built on cohesion, a strong bond of the team. So now you're not only confident in what you can do, you're confident in what others can do around you, and you've been doing it with them enough that you could probably, there's some bleed over in what you can do and what I can do, and I can take some of your job and you can take some of my job. So what that does is increases the bond and creates that confidence in what they do and what the team can do as a whole. And in this phase, you start to kind of go from a hierarchical organization where they may be good, but they tend to be leader centric in that we can do a task, but we're always going to go back to the boss to ask what should we do now. And that there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the step beyond that is, again, referring back to complex systems. This is where you get leader emergence, where somebody who's on the bottom of the sort of rung, the leadership rung, may exhibit qualities and be good enough at what they do and have enough sort of indirect influence that they become an informal leader. And so now you've got sort of heat map leadership all over the organization, which means that it's able to drive itself with less input from the leader, and that's a good thing. That motivates people, and it usually results in more productivity and more innovation. And then the last P is purpose. And this was really hard to get to, but purpose is where every member of the team sees their value as a member of the team, i.e., I don't want the team to have to do their jobs without me because I know I'm an integral part of the team. And I found in the military that if you can crest that peak, what you find is the discipline problems go way down, the ability to cooperate within your team and then outside of the team increases to a phenomenal amount, and it really makes efficiency that much better. And it also includes things like for soldiers when you're off duty, the discipline to make the right decision off duty because you know that making a bad decision, having some beers and then getting in your car and driving, this could reflect poorly on my team. It could take me out of the team. It could hurt the team's productivity. So I'm just going to call one of my teammates who I know will be happy to come get me, um, and then solve that problem like that, rather than just making a bad decision, which can hurt the team. And I think this is a cycle. You don't get to just start a new team from scratch, almost never. So it's cyclical. There's always people coming in and out of your team in the military. That's just how it works. Sometimes you're the new person. So you're starting at trust. You're starting at, touching out to those people and making sure you can build those relationships. More often than not, you're the leader and there's new people coming onto the team. And what I try to, communicate to my leaders is, when you have new people coming onto the team, uh, it's a really important moment for them to understand and forge that initial bond of trust. Because you can kind of, if you just let them come on and kind of just here's some stuff, do this, and you got to really embrace them and bring them in and make sure that they've got everything they need. They don't have any questions, and right off the bat, you've got a really big opportunity to build that trust. So that's a long-winded version of telling you kind of the leadership philosophy that I've settled on.
Okay, so you focus on people first, then
Yep.
partnerships,
Yep.
then practice, and then
Yep.
purpose.
You got it.
Okay, it's an interesting model. Yeah. What are some challenges you've run into at each of those stages in the past?
Yeah. So the first challenge is, that model, because I've developed it over time, makes a lot of sense to me. And I found that, I can explain the model to my team because I have a lot of subordinate leaders who have to kind of replicate that, and it makes sense to them. The question is always translating the concepts in the model into behaviors. That's always sort of that's where we get stuck. You can agree with a concept, but still not know how to do it. When say, okay, here's you and here's your team. Okay, now do trust. It's harder than that. So that's one kind of bridge that I've always had to cross, is sort of explain these things and explain what the behaviors look like and what the interactions look like. Um, and then a lot of times it's, being a leader is uncomfortable. So um, you have to sacrifice your own comfort to make sure that you're doing the right things in each of the P's, or in combinations of the P's. And if you're, for example, an introvert, then doing the engagement type stuff that builds trust is challenging and stressful for you. Um, but that's one of the things leaders have to understand about themselves, is that if I exhibit introvert tendencies around my team, that won't build trust. It might eventually, once they figure you out, but in the short term, you've got to sort of reach out and be uncomfortable so that you can elevate the team and make the team a little more cohesive. So that's just a couple things.
Okay, makes sense. How did you get into leadership to begin with?
Whew. So I joined the Army in 1995 as a junior soldier, and I guess my first exposure to it was my very first non-commissioned. Yeah, so my very first non-commissioned officer wasn't very good, and because I was brand new in the Army, I didn't really know any better, and I didn't know any better until probably 6 months after I got there. A new non-commissioned officer came in who was very good, um, and it was a little rough at first because transitioning from a you know uninterested leader to a leader who's very engaged is a bit stressful, because it puts a lot of pressure on the team to correct themselves and do the work that it takes to become a good team. But it didn't take me long to see that what the new non-commissioned officer is doing is actually good for the team. The level of intelligence and understanding how people work, and knowing every facet of how to do the job that I was supposed to do, and teaching me and training me and making sure my family was okay, like all of that stuff, a bit intrusive. But at the end of the day, it helped build me out as a soldier, and was really good exposure to leadership. And from then on, probably every job I've been in, I've taken away some sort of leadership experience. And sometimes that's from, we all have the experience of a leader that we question whether or not what they're doing is good for the organization or good for you. Or sometimes we know it's not. We know it was the wrong thing to do. But, you take things like that and you just put it on your notepad and say, okay, I'm not going to do it that way. It may not be the opposite of the way that person did it, but it's going to be different, because I didn't like the way that affected me. Right. And then there's good ones. So I've been lucky throughout my career. I think the military has been rewarding for me, because it's all about leadership, regardless of what position you're in, whether it's commander or staff officer or what. So it's been leadership for 28 years, basically.
That's awesome. I'm curious. Have you heard of Jocko Willing and his
Of
concept
course.
of extreme ownership?
Of course.
What do you think of his style of leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to downplay it. He's an amazing guy, but at the end of the day, that's kind of just a military way of seeing leadership. It's not um, it's not that groundbreaking to me. It just makes sense, and like, yeah, of course it's that way.
Okay, I see. So it's fairly obvious if you're in the military.
Um, Obvious might not be the right word, but it's intuitive, I guess.
Okay, fair enough. There's a leadership model I want to run by you and get your thoughts on. I don't remember
Okay.
where I heard this, but it was this idea of like three different styles of leadership. And one of them is authority based, which is the sort of traditional hierarchy where the boss tells the employee what to do and the employee does it, no questions asked, kind of thing.
Mhm.
Then there's the coaching based leadership, which is sort of based on coaching people individually and trying to get them better and fixing their mistakes and things like that, improving them individually. And then there's this gardening based leadership, which is sort of like trying to create the right environment for the good plants to grow and removing the weeds, meaning the people who might not be contributing positively, and just creating an environment that can then allow the intended sort of culture to flourish.
Yeah. Um, Unfortunately, the right answer is usually always somewhere in the middle of that. So, for example, in the military, there's times that you have to be very direct. Um, high stress times are times where time is very sensitive and you don't have a lot of time. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But there's certainly your coaching time in the military. We're real big on regular counseling. Um, so if you do that well, then you're doing it either monthly or quarterly with individuals one on one, where you talk about career and what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and how to get better, and whatever else comes up. And of course, the gardening, and there will be certain people where, um, especially the ones that are very high potential, you want to cultivate them and make sure that they stay on the right path, and hopefully stay in the army to make the army better if they're cultivated correctly. Um, so I would say there's a time and a place for all of that, and for each of those leadership styles. And I think if you if you try to pick one, at some point you're probably going to be using the wrong leadership style. Um, they're all good. They're all valid in certain contexts. Um, but a good leader will, like I said, you've got to understand your own personality style. You've got to understand the personality style of those folks that work for you. Some people will respond very well, just personality styles, right? Some people want the direct leader. And to them, it's just easier it removes ambiguity from what the leader wants. So if they're very direct and tell them sort of how they want something done, I found that there's just certain people that respond to that better. They're more comfortable being told how to do things. I'm the opposite. Just give me kind of a rough estimate of what you want this to look like, and let me just figure out all the rest. And I promise I'll get you there. That's kind of how I am. But the coaching, some people respond very well to coaching. Some people don't. So you've got to know, is this the right time? Is this the right person to engage in coaching? And then I think the gardening and the cultivating, I think that's applicable. Like I said, for certain people. There's some people that if you try and that seed just doesn't sprout, you may not want to spend too much time trying to cultivate those folks. But there's definitely opportunities that you don't want to miss, because you could potentially benefit your organization or another organization. It's still worth putting time and effort into someone who's got a lot of potential.
Okay, it makes sense. So it sounds like you value flexibility a lot, which makes a lot of
Yeah,
sense
yeah.
considering how malleable these situations are. Um, so could you tell a story of like a challenging time where you had to step up as a leader?
Um, there's a couple stories I like to tell. So, um, one I will tell from one of my very first exposures in the Army, and that's with it's a good contrast between when I was led by a disinterested person versus a very interested person, and the transition happened to be the day that something significant happened. So I'll back up first. Um, and I'm very new in the Army. I've been in the Army maybe a month. Just got out of basic training and all that stuff. So I'm in the unit for maybe a month. Don't really know what I'm doing. There wasn't a lot of training going on. So brand new soldier. You can cut grass and stuff like that, but if there's nothing going on, like you're not just gonna make something up. So we're having sort of weekly meetings, and at one of the meetings, the disinterested in soldier of the month board. Hey Wells, you're pretty smart. I think you should go to this board. I said, sure, sounds great. Never heard of it, didn't know what it was. About 30 days later, he said, hey, that board's tomorrow. Don't forget to bring in your dress uniform. I said, no problem. I got it. So showed up the next day, had my dress uniform. Didn't know anything about the board, so they had to tell me how to walk in and knock and report to the board and all this other stuff. So I sat down, and they started asking me questions, and I didn't know the answers to any of these questions. Um, and he got to the third question, and it was a senior non-commissioned officer. He said, "Did you study for this at all?" And I said, "No, I didn't." Because I didn't know any better. And I didn't know, I was so new that I didn't know enough to know that I should be a little bit intimidated and sort of scared that I look like an idiot. I just didn't know any better. And it just so happened that the new non-commissioner, the new boss, got there and was watching me. He just arrived. So and I'm convinced that this is not my fault. And really it's not. But he pulled me outside and he said, I don't want to hear excuses, blah, blah, blah. This, you look bad, blah, blah, blah. We're going to fix this, which kind of rubbed me the wrong way, obviously, but I'm a new soldier. So, I don't say anything. But at the end of the day, it was one of those sort of aha moments that then it's very clear what had happened. I didn't ask any questions. I just kind of went along with it. I had a bad NCO. Then is when I knew that guy's a bad NCO. This is a good NCO. So, not a very compelling story, but very, very formidable as far as my upbringing and introduction to that new NCO. There's some other ones, but I'll tell you, like, in the military, I don't want to get too in depth on it, but in Afghanistan, we drove around a lot, so there was, because it's so dusty on the roads, you can see vehicles coming from quite far away, which led the bad guys to go out and bury little IEDs in the sand because it's very loose. You can just run out there and bury it, and you're gone in 30 seconds. So we had to go to a checkpoint to check in on some Afghan police. We knew there was the quick route was always had IEDs on it, so we didn't want to take that route. So we took a really long route. Instead of 45 minutes, it took us like 4 hours, but there was no IEDs because we never took that road, so they weren't expecting it. While we were there at the checkpoint, somebody else came up through the short route. It was clear. I said, okay, well, it's dark now. Let's take the short route home. Long story short, we got stuck in I think there was 4 IEDs that we'd hit one and have to go again, and 4 IEDs, and it was pretty traumatic. We had to call in a medevac, so it was a big deal. And I remember thinking, I think I'm fairly good at leadership, but all of that changes when the environment turns into a life or death or crisis, or you absolutely have to make the right decision right now. And there's no time. And if you're wrong, it's going to be really bad. So conceptualizing what leadership looks like in a normal corporate environment versus a very high stress military environment, I would almost say, everything I knew about leadership didn't matter at that point. You know what I mean? It's just about, I've got this very few options right now. I've got to pick the right option, and it's, if you pick the wrong option, somebody could die. So very stressful. And I just want to point out that's also one of the times where I understood the difference between being a good leader is always contextual, and then how you approach leadership is contextual. And that's one of those times where people didn't want to have some coaching while we're doing that. People wanted direct answers and they wanted to know what to do because it's, you feel compelled to take some kind of action. So very different circumstances.
Wow, yeah, what a compelling story. So it sounds like the IEDs might have been placed after the first envoy came through. Okay,
Yeah.
that's unfortunate. Yeah. So outside of the military, how have you been able to apply the leadership lessons you've learned?
Well, I'm going to avoid telling stories about being my wife's leader because I think we kind of flip flop on that one. But you know, what I'm trying to do right now is take what I've learned in leadership and translate that into helping corporate sector or helping other businesses understand leadership, maybe from a different perspective. And since I've been doing it so long, I can see it through a lot of different lenses. I can articulate it. I can disaggregate what leadership activities are. So where I'm going is trying to get into that, and either as a coach or a consultant. What I really am passionate about is helping other leaders understand themselves as a leader, understand how to capitalize on the strengths of their team. Um, but outside of the military, I don't know. That's a tough one because I've been in the military so long, and it's essentially a 24-hour job. Um, so outside of the military, I'd be really strapped to come up with some good stories or vignettes on how I how I leverage my leadership skills. Um, but hopefully, in a few years after I retire, maybe I'll have some good stories then.
So, what was coaching your first client like? at summary leadership?
Haven't coached any yet.
Okay. You're looking for a
So
first line.
yeah, so my rough plan right now is I'm in 28 years right now in the Army. What I'm doing is sort of slowly building my sort of leadership package. So, build the website. And I'm passionate about leadership. So I can write 2 or 3 articles about interesting concepts that I just think of sometimes, or I've got, books of kind of models and stuff, that just things I've noticed as a leader that translate into some sort of leadership model or leadership theory. So I'm sort of building this, I guess, this reservoir of book ideas, articles, social media posts, stuff on the website. So because I'm at 28 years, I have a few more years before I plan on retire. I think I've got probably 3 left. So I'm going to use this first year to kind of set the baseline and in some ways establish some credentials that are outside the military, um, but no clients as of yet.
Okay, interesting. What would you look for in a client? How would you qualify a client?
Um, Yeah, that depends because leadership comes in all styles. What I really want is a young leader who's really passionate about becoming a better leader. I think that's where I can make a lot of impact because it didn't really, I was in leadership positions since I was, 23, um, 25, 28 years ago, but I didn't really start thinking about, what is leadership? Like, let me really try to process it. And like I said, when I built the P4 model, like, explain your leadership style specifically. Like, how exactly do you want to lead? It wasn't till, halfway through my career that I actually started to consider that stuff. So someone who's sort of right there at that transition point, who's, either recently taken over a leadership position or just been in it long enough to understand that, wow, this is complicated. I need to start thinking and figuring out how to be a better leader. Because I think that's where, when I talked about the construct proliferation, all the different books on leaders, there's thousands, articles, there's theories. That's about the time that people start to dig and look. Okay, here's the book. Well, this book says to do this as a leader. This book says to do this, and they all say something kind of different. There's some overlap, but they're all a little bit different. So which one do you really focus on? What I think is, if I can find some leader who's sort of at that initial transition point, I can focus them in on how to discover what their true leadership style would be.
Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah, interesting. Are there any books you'd recommend on leadership that were like formative for your learning?
It's kind of a cop out, but I would say all of them.
All of them?
What I would really start with, if I was a blank slate and I just wanted to learn some concepts about leadership, you start with guys like Simon Sinek, John Maxwell, but you know what's her name, Brene Brown.
Yep.
I think that's another good one. But that's sort of your starting point, and what it led me to was kind of branching out. Said, okay, this is some interesting stuff, but why is all this true? So, I branched out and started to study things like complexity theory. And then, complexity theory leads you to complexity leadership theory, where you take systems theory and complexity and overlay it on social systems, and then look at how organizations are actually complex systems. And then, okay, what are the implications if I use complexity theory as my sort of model? How does that work in leadership and in teams? And frankly, that's kind of the one I gravitate to most times. You have things like evolutionary theory, personality theory, like, the initial understanding of kind of your position as a leader and why is it important to understand leadership is always a good start. So any popular leadership book is probably a good start because they're all going to say something just a little different. And until you've got a breadth of knowledge, you're going to be doing you're going to be mirroring the recommendations of the book essentially, until you see that, wow, there's like hundreds of ways to do this, and then understanding how as a leader, you really want to influence people and get the people to do the things that's best for the team, best for the organization, and best for each other. What that really boils down to is other stuff, is like the evolutionary and personality stuff and the complexity theory and how people interact. So it gets a little complicated. So there's a lot of stuff, but any good leadership book is a good start.
Okay, perfect. So most of my audience is young men. I tend to focus on helping them. So I want to ask you, what do you think are some unique challenges young men are facing in the modern world today that maybe they didn't face as much, say, 20 years ago? And how could they start to, approach some solutions about them?
Yeah, it's always tough. Again, I'll go back to the proliferation of so many leadership constructs. So the first thing is um, start somewhere and understand how you can translate what you learn about leadership into your own life. How you can understand how being a coach or getting coached is important to not only you as a leader, um, but you as a person. You as you develop and learn how to, navigate your own life. Um, and then so try to understand leadership as much as you can, even though there's a lot of information. It's also a good thing because there's plenty of resources to go to. But you need to understand also how to just apply leadership throughout your life. So even if you're not necessarily in a leadership position at your work, one thing I always encourage folks to do is to watch their leader and be particularly aware of when your boss or leader interacts with the team. What methods do they use? Are they articulate? Are they short? Even the personality gestures, like how are they coming across? How are they making you feel? Just really take note of that stuff, because at the end of the day, whether it's good or bad, it sort of sets a baseline, and you get exposure to many different people. Study the people that make you feel good, like regardless of the content of the conversation. If you talk to someone, you're like, wow, you got to think about it a little bit, but hey, you know what, that conversation made me feel good. Conversely, there's other conversations where you come away neutral or feeling bad, like that conversation made me a little stressed. Study that stuff, because that's, you want to be the leader that whatever the conversation, even if it's, you need to improve this, or whatever the topic, here's how I think you should improve it. You can still come away from those feeling kind of good. So you need to really study how to do that and how to interact and engage with people.
Okay. What do you think of this idea that leadership starts with self-leadership?
100%. So to me, what that means is everybody's got a unique personality. Um, a lot of your personality is genetic. So in some ways, your personality is fixed. So the first thing if you really want to be a leader, there's different leadership styles, like we talked about. Everybody's going to have their own leadership style, and ideally, you understand your own personality enough to choose to employ the leadership style that is most suited to you. Here's what I mean. So if you take something like the Big Five personality model, and take one of the traits, extroversion. If you're an extrovert, there are certain environments, situations that you will excel in, because they require you to interact with a lot of people. Um, that's just one example of a trait. If you're an introvert, then you need to, and you want to be a leader, either you have to spend some time watching extroverts, and then because extroverts generally are viewed as being more effective leaders because they're more engaging. So you need to spend some time figuring out how to behave like an extrovert, like to do the extrovert things for your team. Not all the time, but enough so that you don't want to be stuck in your office as a introvert, just kind of not engage with people. And people interpret that generally as they've got to come up with a reason, because they're not just going to say, well, that guy's an introvert. They're going to say, well, he doesn't like me because I can't get him to talk to me, or he's just rude, or they're going to have to attribute some reason to why you won't engage with them. So understanding yourself, and then being disciplined about what you do, understanding your personality so that you can leverage your personality characteristics, the ones that are most suited for leadership. should be the ones that you're aware of and you can leverage to become a better leader. So lead yourself 100% accurate.
Okay, cool. Um, what do you think of Jocko Willing's idea of good? He has like this short video that has gotten a lot of views, basically just edited together of like all the bad things happening, but then him saying good. And he told this story of one of his subordinates coming to him and reporting some bad news, and then kind of sighing and shaking his head. And Jocko was like, "What's wrong?" And he said, "Well, I know what you're going to say. You're just going to say good." What do you think of that idea?
Yeah, I mean, there's some validity to that.
Hmm.
Um, my, the question is, you can say the word good, but it takes more. It takes more brain power to actually convince yourself that something good is coming. Now, the way he couched it, I believe, was you could see the value, even if what actually happened was not did not meet our expectations, and it put us in the wrong direction. Of course, there's always a way you can approach that in a positive manner. Hey, we this didn't go right because we didn't train enough, so that lets us know that we need to train more. So now you have a metric by which to measure and get better. So there's some validity to that. I mean, it's more like if you just interpret it as saying the word good, there's more work that has to go into it than that.
Yeah, it seems
But
like
he's not off.
it connects with Stoicism, which has this idea of amor fati, which is to love your fate, right? So, like, how do you learn to love whatever happens? Because it's already happened, right? There's no point hating on what's already happened.
Yeah. Well, the way I kind of explain this to people is go back to the big five model. There's neuroticism is one of the traits in there. Someone who's high in neuroticism is quick to have a negative emotional reaction to some sort of change in the environment. What I kind of tell people is, if I see them sort of borderline, I can see that they're getting emotional about something. I say, look, nothing we do most of the time is worth having an emotion about. What we're doing is we're solving problems. So if you get presented with a problem that you didn't expect, there's no requisite emotion attached to that. It's just another problem. Your job is to solve problems. So all that happened was somebody gave you a problem you didn't expect, and that's okay. Now you just have another problem, and that does not require an emotional response at all. I mean, that's harder to do in practice, especially on the higher neuroticism scale. That natural tendency, like personality, is kind of fixed, right? So their natural tendency will be to have that. You get a bunch of chemicals that rush to your brain, and you have it. So it takes a minute to sort of know yourself, right? But to be able to reframe what just happened into, it's just another problem.
Yeah, and there's this idea from philosophy that I love that is something like the process of creating knowledge involves converting problems into better problems.
Yeah, that's great.
Like
That's
we'll
it.
never run out of problems. We'll always have things that we want to solve, things we want to change, things we want to improve. And I think life would be boring if it had no problems.
Yeah, there's a funny. So we have a process in the military or in the army, military decision making process, right? And it kind of applies to generally any problem, but on the really complex side of problems, we use a different method, and if it's a really sort of on the simple side, we use a different method. But for most of it, we use this process. And the way I see it, the more I study this thing, because I'm pretty low in conscientiousness, so I kind of like to just free form stuff. I don't like a rigid process, and so I don't like the process first of all. So, but in my many years of being part of this process, essentially what happens is you get a big problem, like you've got to deploy your battalion to Iraq or the National Training Center in California, which is a big problem. So what you do is you go through all this analysis. You look at all your options. You figure out what questions do you need to ask. What assumptions do you have to make? So you do this big planning process, and basically what you do is you took this big problem and you chunked it into small manageable problems, and then you put some sort of solution, whether it's now or later, against all of these problems, and then you gave it to subordinate units or people as problems that they will solve at some predetermined time, whether it's now or later. But um, there's always either something you missed or didn't think about, or something that shouldn't have happened that happened that created an unforeseen problem, or some of those little problems you had it wrong, and something happened that you didn't expect. You expected something else, was a different problem now. Or some people just make a mistake or forget or don't solve the problem, which adds another problem. So what you did is essentially had this big problem. You solved as much of it as you could, and then you ended up with, if you're lucky, zero. But there's always some remainder of problems that didn't get solved or came up that were new or got solved wrong. So you traded this big problem for these small problems. If you did it well, then you've got a small amount of small problems that are just leftover stuff. But if you do it well and you've got good teams, even those leftover problems can get solved pretty quick.
Yeah, makes sense. So a bit off topic, but what are some of your favorite hobbies?
Okay, so I'm in Germany, so I don't engage in this hobby right now, but I like shooting pistols. So when I'm back in the U.S., shooting pistols is fun. What I can do in Germany is ride motorcycles. The weather's kind of crappy right now, so that's not happening. But me and my wife ride motorcycles. We have ADV bikes, so on road, off road. We just came from Colorado, so spent a lot of time on the dirt roads up in the Rocky Mountains, which was fantastic.
Nice.
Um, we both ride bicycles, so gravel bike, riding bicycles. I really enjoy going to the gym every day. Still, after decades of doing it, still something I have fun at. Then me and my wife, when we're not doing any of that, kind of sitting around eating snacks and just watching TV.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, sounds like a good life.
It's all right.
That actually reminds me about going to the gym every day. Jocko Willink, there was a book by him, Way of the Warrior Kid, which I found really interesting. Have you heard of that book?
I've heard of it. I have not read it.
Because afterwards he got letters from kids like thanking him, but then he also started getting letters from adults who had read their kids the book and then changed their own life, transformed their own lives positively. And he was surprised at that.
Yeah.
And I read the book and it was actually really good. So it's basically about a kid and his Navy SEAL uncle who comes over for summer vacation. And then this kid is being bullied and like he can't do a single pull up at school. He's afraid of water and all of these problems. And then, the uncle slowly trains them on them one by one. He teaches them to work out every day. And the kid conquers them. And by the end of summer, he's like, he knows jujitsu. His bully can't touch him. He's able to swim. He's able to do multiple pull ups and all of this stuff. So I thought, wow, that's really encouraging.
Yeah, it's funny where you can not only get sort of a framework for how to live your life, but just little ways that give you kind of insights into can I be better. So that's really interesting.
What would you say your core values are?
Um, Family's a big one, and in family, it sort of bleeds over into since I've been in the military so long, um, the military is part of my family. Like in my units, typically I try to treat those as families. So that's a big one. Um, Doing something you're passionate about. Again, that's I've the one thing that I always gravitate. I've done a lot of stuff in the military with deployments and all kinds of stuff. But the one thing that is always compelling to me is helping leaders understand how to be better leaders and training folks, and especially when they're very engaged and they want to be there, really spending time um, helping them understand how to be a leader through my own experiences. And I'm by no means am I the example, but I've learned enough. I've made enough mistakes and learned enough throughout 28 years to really enjoy helping folks do that. Um, and then having an outlet is really important. So like I said, the motorcycles. The wife and I have taken 7 to 10 day motorcycle vacations. Just kind of leave everything behind, take off, stay on the motorcycles for 7 to 10 days. Really, just kind of make sure that you are. I don't want to use the word balance because it gets misinterpreted, but make sure you have some sort of outlet that you're actually doing something that is relatively stress free, work related, and then fun.
Does the word balance get misinterpreted?
So it's a you know we use that, and it's a work-life balance thing. We try to promote that in the Army, but essentially it gets misinterpreted as you should work X number of hours, 8 to 12, depending on what your work shift is. You should spend some sort of equitable amount of time at home with your family or by yourself if you don't have family or whatever. And then I think I think people make the mistake of assuming, based on that model, assuming that they're doing something wrong if they're working late. And I say that in this context. There are some people that are very high in conscientiousness that if I go in at 4:30, 5 o'clock and say you have to go home right now, that will create more stress on them because they needed 30 more minutes to finish this project they were working on. When some people are very attached to the project, and their brain just focuses in on it, you can create more stress. And there's some times in my life where I'm all out of balance, right? If you're deployed, you're away from your family for months to a year or more. Um, so that's way out of balance. Where sometimes early 2003, maybe every month I got a phone call home, maybe, and we had to write letters. There was no email. Um, so you have to understand. I guess the point is this: you really have to understand what is balance for you. At some point in your life, if you're young and you're trying to establish yourself as a good leader, or you want start a business and make the business thrive so that you can have that 10 years from now, then balance is going to look different at that point. And you just have to come to grips with, I need to work this much and I want to work this much. I'm going to sacrifice my family a little bit here, a little bit there, or vice versa. The family, there's a reason I want to be with my family right now. I'm going to minimize my work hours and be more with my family right now because that's where I'm at in my life, and that's what needs to happen right now. So balance, the way I usually explain it to folks is, you got to look at balance over a period of years and not just today. So today, it might mean working 16 hours so that you can get a lot done, so that you can have a 3-day weekend. It might mean you spending a year in a combat zone with your Army family, um, and then you'll have to make that up on the back end with your chosen family.
Right. Okay, makes sense. So yeah, my final question for you is just: is there anyone you think I should interview? And if there is, what question would you want to ask them?
Hmm. Got to give me a second to think about that one.
Yeah, take your time.
Yeah, I can give you a name off the air. I can send you a name. And
Yeah.
I would say, yeah, I get a good question. So I'll do it off the air.
Okay,
That's all
sounds
right.
good. That's fine.
Yeah.
So we still have about 12 minutes, so might as well just talk about. I see you have like an RGB microphone. Are you a gamer, or is that just you like the look of it?
No, I just bought that to do podcasts, and like I said, I'm in Germany, so the selection was kind of limited.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Are you stationed in Germany right now? Is that
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
And what is your
So I'm at
current
the headquarters. Go ahead.
job in the military? And also, yeah, you're at the
So
headquarters. Okay.
yeah, headquarters. It's called AFRICOM, Africa Command. So it's a joint headquarters in the Department of Defense that basically is in rough terms in charge of Africa, the continent of Africa, for the U.S. military. So my job is, you have large scale, you have operations, AFRICOM operations. In operations, you have everywhere from what's going on right now to what's going on 12 months from now, kind of a strategic outlook, and even beyond. I'm sort of at that what's going on right now branch. So it's called current operations. Um, so usually, for example, you plan something that's campaign level operation 12 months from now, and 12 months later, that's now. So then you hand it over to us, and then we make sure that the operation gets executed uh, on the ground.
Does that mean you visit Africa?
I haven't yet, but I am visiting Africa next month.
Okay, interesting. Cool. And how do you deploy leadership the way you've explained it to me in your current role?
Well, I was just thinking about that today. So The way I explain it to you, the P4 model especially is based on years of experience in a very hierarchical army organization. It works pretty well there as long as you can work with your junior leaders and make sure they understand it and sort of make clear the behaviors that get them where we want to get. The organization I'm in now, it's about 12 people, and they're all fairly senior. So the model still applies, but you get to think about it. In my last job, I was the oldest and most senior person in the brigade. I was the commander. Um, Everybody else is subordinate, younger, all the way down to 19, 20-year-old soldiers. Um, Leading a 19, 20-year-old soldier is much different than leading a 50 to 60-year-old man who's been retired from the military for a few years. So a lot of the stuff that will take time to teach junior leaders on, you don't need it here. You just kind of level the bubbles. And situation like this, what's important is just shared expectations. Everybody that I work for is very competent. So as long as we can kind of come together and you know understand what the goals of the organization, what are our expectations, you know, what are the routine things on the calendar that we have to do. As long as we can understand that and lay the organization flat, generally you're going to be okay. And I'm the newest person there. I've been there 6 months. I'm the newest person there. Everybody else has been there either a couple years or much longer. So different, totally different organization to lead. It takes less of an active leadership role. Still, there's always room for the good leader. But here you have to be careful because there's little tolerance for certain types of very direct leadership. There's just doesn't fly very well in a very experienced organization.
Sense. There's this book I really liked called Crucial Conversations, and in there
Mm-hmm.
they mentioned this idea that if you have mutual respect and mutual intention with someone, then you can communicate openly with them. Like you can say anything and it will be received well, because they know you respect them as a
Yeah,
human being, and they know that you and them want the same thing, the same outcomes.
yeah, that's that trust I was talking about. Like you can't do that with most people just right off the bat. You've got to get some sort of some level of trust between those two people where and you've got friends, we've all got friends like that where you literally can say anything and they know you enough to know that that thing you said is not necessarily indicative of a personality flaw or whatever. um, but yeah, that really the baseline there is trust.
Do you have any advice for building trust?
um, yeah, for sure. So the way I explain it to people when I counsel them, because what I used to do was I would say when they come in for a one-on-one counseling, I would say, okay, trust is important. Explain to me what you're doing or how are you building trust. And it's a funny thing, like that was always a really tough question for them to answer, um, because they're trying to they're young, they're trying to understand it, they're trying to give me the one thing they do. That's it's not that kind. That's not how you answer that question. It's because like I said, when people first come into your organization, it starts then, even before then, because you're in contact with them, saying, here's what you're going to do. Come here. You know, we'll help you out. Whatever. It starts there. Um, I mean, the first thing is you genuinely have to have their best interest at heart. You can't. You can only fake trust for so long, and you certainly can't surge on trust. Like you can't be in an organization and then something important's getting ready to happen. So now I'm going to start doing the trust activities. Like it doesn't work like that. So it's really the sum total of all of your interactions. Have to keep that in mind. Even if I'm talking to somebody over here and one of my soldiers sees me and sees me mistreating someone, like that trust level will start to go down a little bit. Um, but there's things like just being true to your word, conveying through conversation and through your actions that you do have their best interests at heart. If you've got to make a hard decision that makes, I hate to say it like this, but this is how humans think, right? If we're going to have to do something that makes you uncomfortable, do something that's hard, difficult, physically or mentally or whatever, sometimes it's just better to explain, look, we're doing this because the organization needs this X, Y, and Z. It needs to happen, and we're the ones that have to do it. Some kind of way to explain the why this has to happen. I think a lot of times the mistake junior leaders make is they misinterpret military leadership as being very direct, and you shouldn't need to know why. And like I said, sometimes there's a time for that. I don't have time for the why, but if we've established that trust relationship through our interactions and my benevolence towards you, there will be a time where you don't need the why. You trust your leader. He said we got to do this right now. Let's just do it. If there's time, we'll figure out why later, but it doesn't matter. But sum total of all your interactions, and you have to be very careful because it takes a long time to establish true trust. And it doesn't have to be like 100% implicit trust, but enough trust that that person's got your best interest at heart. You can end it in a second. Tell my leaders, you can have some kind of misconduct, bam, you're back at square zero. So takes a long time to build. Doesn't take long at all to lose it.
Yeah, in Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek, he shared this story of a helicopter pilot who flew back into enemy ground to rescue members of his team. And when asked why he risked his life to do that, he said, "Because I knew they would do the same for me."
Yeah.
And it seems like
I've heard that story.
Yeah.
I think it was Johnny Bravo was the pilot, something like that.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a great story, and it's so true. That happens so much in the military that you can't. It's hard to articulate it, but I'm willing to accept a hell of a lot of risk to try my best to do something to save these guys, because if I was down there, I would want somebody to do the same thing for me, and I know they would do it.
Yeah. And other than that, I guess building trust seems to be about, like you said, making promises and keeping them. And that's true even for building trust in yourself.
Yeah. I found that, as a leader, you never, well, I don't want to say you never, but you kind of question, should I show any kind of vulnerability? Trust is related to vulnerability, but I found that because for a while I didn't want to do it. It felt wrong. I didn't want them to think I was weak or didn't know what I was doing. But after a while, I said, I'm just going to come in here and say, look, guys, we got to do this thing. I have no idea how to do this. Let's all get together. You guys help me understand why we're doing this. Or, hey guys, I have this plan. I think it's a good plan. Let me explain it to you. You guys think this will work? And let them kind of give you some feedback. If it's no good, fine. My theory was always that, we just got to succeed at this thing. I don't care if it's my idea or anybody's idea. It doesn't matter. As long as we succeed, the team wins. Great. But yeah, it's a fair point.
Yeah, there's this great saying, you'd be surprised how much can get done when nobody cares who gets the credit.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
It's so true.
Yeah. Well, it's been great having you on, Damon. Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thanks for reaching out.
Yeah, I'd love to have you on again sometime. Take care.
Just give me a call.
Will do.
See you.
See you.